I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C., and these are the top headlines of the hour. Russia's foreign ministry says it has traded Trevor Reed, a former US Marine held in a Russian jail, for a Russian citizen who is serving a 20-year sentence in the United States. Russia's defense ministry says it has forces that have destroyed a large quantity of Western-supplied weapons in southeastern Ukraine with long-range missiles.
The European Union has made already a third tranche of financial support to buying lethal equipment to Ukraine of 500 million euros, and it totals now in 1.5 billion.
In an exclusive conversation with WION, Lithuania's foreign minister says that the global response against the Russian invasion of Ukraine is unprecedented, as the European Union alone has given over 1.5 billion in military aid to Kiev. Chinese military condemns the United States after a US warship sails through the sensitive Taiwan Strait. Beijing calls this a deliberate attempt to harm peace and stability in the region. SpaceX launches 4 astronauts to the International Space Station for NASA, less than 2 days after completing a flight chartered by millionaires. The US Secretary of State has welcomed his Czech Republic counterpart to the State Department in Washington, D.C. The Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, Jan Lipavsky, is on a visit to the US for the funeral service for former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who came to the US as a child refugee and rose to become the first female Secretary of State, shaping American foreign policy at the end of the 20th century. She died at the age of 84. Blinken took the opportunity to thank the Czech Republic for supporting Ukrainian refugees through the Russian aggression since February this year.
The Czech Republic has been a remarkable supporter of Ukraine in this effort. It has taken in more than 300,000 refugees from Ukraine, making it the home, in quotation marks, for Ukrainian refugees, one of the largest in Europe beyond the immediate border states. And it has been a staunch partner in NATO as we work to shore up NATO's defenses against possible Russian aggression. So in these ways and so many more, as well as assuming the presidency of the European Union this summer, this is a vital time for the work that we're doing together.
The meeting comes as Russian energy giant Gazprom has announced shutting off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. Both countries are the first nations to have their gas cut off by Europe's main supplier. Russian President Vladimir Putin had demanded that countries have to make payments in rubles. The move to cut off supplies also followed sanctions imposed by Warsaw against Russian individuals and companies. In Washington, D.C., the foreign minister of the Czech Republic has blamed Putin's KGB mindset for the invasion and for further decisions.
Weapons are what decides the will, and weapons is what decides the result on the ground. And sadly, Putin's mind is a product of KGB Soviet era. And he really believes in this Soviet myth. They do not consider Ukraine a sovereign state, which means they are against the international order. And this imperialistic vision tends to snowball. So would be let to go away with the aggression against Ukraine, we would pay much higher cost in the future.
On the other side of the world, the United States has sent a warship through the sensitive Taiwan Strait, and Beijing has called it a deliberate attempt to harm peace and stability in the region. According to the US Navy, the guided missile destroyer, USS Sampson, is conducting a routine transit along the strait in accordance with international laws. Washington has been carrying out such transits along the strait about once a month, but Beijing sees this as a sign of support for Taiwan. It views the democratically governed island nation as part of its territory.
台湾问题事关中国的核心利益我们绝不允许也坚决反对外部势力来干涉。美国应该恪守一个中国原则和中美3个联合公报慎重妥善处理涉台问题，不要再做破坏台海和平稳定、升级台海局势紧张的事情。我们坚决反对美国向台湾出售武器，反对美台之间发展任何形式的这个军事联系那么美方的这一举动违背他对中国的严肃承诺，美方应该言行一致。
The People's Liberation Army's Eastern Theatre Command has said that its forces monitored and warned the ship. Meanwhile, Taiwan's Defence Ministry has clarified that the US warship sailed north from the start and that the situation in the waterway was normal. In a statement, the 7th Fleet spokesman of the United States, Nicholas Lingo, said that their military flies, sails and operates wherever international law permits them. Although the United States has no formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, it is one of its biggest supporters internationally and also an important arms supplier. It's a constant source of heightened tensions between Beijing and Washington. Well, soon the United States will be unveiling its national strategy to deal with China. This announcement comes after the State Department confirmed its plans to open an embassy in the Solomon Islands in the Pacific. The President, Joe Biden, plans to develop a comprehensive strategy to address the threat China poses to the global order.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he will soon lay out the Biden White House strategy for dealing with China's emergence as a great power. After more than a year since Biden took office, the administration has taken flak from Republicans for lacking a formal approach to Washington's main strategic competitor. Blinken spoke to a Tuesday hearing at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
I will have an opportunity, I think, very soon in the coming weeks to speak publicly and in some detail about the strategy.
Blinken faced grilling from Senator Mitt Romney on a military agreement signed between China and the Solomon Islands.
Our lead China expert at the White House, Kurt Campbell, along with the Assistant Secretary for the region, Dan Crittenbrink, led a delegation to the Solomon Islands. The delegation met with the Prime Minister. He vowed publicly as well as privately that there would be no Chinese military base, no long-term presence, no power projection capability. We will be watching that very, very closely in the weeks and months ahead.
A source familiar with the plans, however, said that the China plans Blinken covers publicly won't be very detailed. US President Joe Biden will host ASEAN leaders at a summit in Washington on May the 12th and 13th, and he is expected to visit Asia, including South Korea and Japan, later this month.
Meanwhile, the United States has witnessed a huge COVID-19 surge during the Omicron wave that took place here last winter. And the latest survey has revealed that more than half of the US population was infected with COVID by the beginning of this year. According to an antibody survey by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 58% of the US population was infected with COVID by February. The figure was more than 190 million people, which is far higher than the 80 million officially recorded cases. It means that the majority of infections were undiagnosed, asymptomatic, or just unreported. The Omicron wave was particularly threatening for children. And as per a paper based on a study of antibody levels, roughly 75% of people under 18 had been infected. The study examined only antibodies created in response to prior infections, not vaccinations. From September last year to January 2022, the study examined some 75,000 blood specimens every month taken from across the United States. 45,000 samples were examined in February. Even now, hospitalizations are on the rise in the country. Upstate New York and the Northeast region, where COVID mandates have long ceased to be in effect, are experiencing an increase in hospitalizations. The CDC has recommended indoor masking in those areas. Even with rising hospitalizations, there has been a sharp reduction in fatalities as the result of rising population immunity. Daily deaths in the US stand at a little over 300 per day. The US, though, is expected to reach the grim milestone of 1 million deaths in the coming weeks. On the vaccination front, the US is currently offering fourth shots to people aged 50 and over, and third shots to people under 50 years. Children aged 5 and under, though, are the only group not yet eligible for a vaccination. Meanwhile, Pfizer has submitted an application to the FDA to authorise the third shot for children aged 5 to 11. Sticking with COVID in the US, and in the latest, the US Vice President Kamala Harris has tested positive for coronavirus. According to a spokesperson, Harris is asymptomatic and currently under self-isolation.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris tested positive for COVID-19 on Tuesday, but is not showing any symptoms, according to a spokesperson who said that Harris has not been in close contact with President Joe Biden or First Lady Jill Biden and is in isolation. In recent weeks, Harris's husband, her communications director, and White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, among others, have disclosed positive tests. Officials have said Biden's regular contact with advisors and supporters could expose him to COVID, but the administration is keen to project a sense of normalcy. White House COVID-19 response chief Ashish Jha said on Tuesday that it's hard to ensure no one gets COVID, including President Biden.
We have a very, very contagious variant out there. It is going to be hard to ensure that no one gets COVID in America. That's not even a policy goal. The goal of our policies should be, obviously, minimize infections whenever possible, but to make sure people don't get seriously ill.
While infections have risen in the United States, fueled by the highly transmissible Omicron BA.2 subvariant, hospitalizations remain low. Since the Omicron surge, a nationwide blood survey released Tuesday showed some 58% of Americans have been infected with the coronavirus since the start of the pandemic. The study, issued by the CDC, marks the first time more than half of the U.S. population has been infected with the virus at least once. But the CDC also cautioned that the antibodies do not necessarily protect against future infections.
Moving now to China, and Beijing has been struggling with a significant surge in COVID-19 cases. The capital reported 33 new cases on Tuesday, a fraction of Shanghai's daily tally of nearly 16,000 cases. Despite relatively low numbers, Beijing authorities are now voicing their concerns that this steady surge in cases might go out of control if not contained now. Mandatory mass testing has now entered its third day as civil authorities ramp up measures to curb the outbreak. Beijing has ordered residents of the 12 central districts to undergo 3 rounds of testing after dozens of infections were reported in the last few days. The capital's most populous district, Chaoyang, was the first one to order mass testing on Monday. From targeted lockdowns to mass testing, China has imposed some of the hardest COVID regulations since the start of the pandemic. It's all part of China's zero COVID strategy. The financial hub of Shanghai was entirely locked down for weeks, and the latest mass testing order in Beijing has now sparked renewed fears that the capital region will be placed under similar restrictions. Now for something entirely different and moving on to the world of marble. The stone has been popular amongst artists and sculptors across the globe. From Michelangelo to Bartoldi, artists have used marble to carve out works of art that hold great cultural value. But now that the times have changed, it's time for robots to try their hand at a spot of sculpting.
Anyone who appreciates the art of sculpting has probably heard of Carrara marble, the prized medium of some of the most popular sculptures and art pieces. It was the medium used to carve out Michelangelo's David. But as time progresses, so does technology. And now, precision robots are using the same marble to make modern sculptures. After years spent on developing a software to create a robotic arm that can carve out precise and intricate sculptures, the BOT-1 was created. A robot that comes equipped with precise tools, giant arms and water jets to cool off the stone.
A robot is seen as being a modern machine, and everything modern instills fear. Artisans who have not yet embraced this technology are wary, with the fear that their jobs or work will be stolen. But after an initial approach, they understand the potential, begin to use it, and their life changes. Because they can work more, they can work better. In the end, technology allows you to watch a sunset while a machine works for you. It is not only a robot which steals jobs, also because a robot needs to be maneuvered every day. It needs staff to assist it. It doesn't do everything by itself. It is a non-thinking machine. It needs human instructions and the work is thus produced.
Created by Robotor, a company owned by Giacomo Massari, the BOT-1 enables making sculptures from not just marble but also wood and plastic. What would traditionally take years to make can now be achieved in just a couple of days and in a safer environment. But what do the traditionalists think about this invention? Well, they're not happy.
A sculpture refined by a robot is a dead sculpture. That refined by an artisan, as far as I'm concerned, is a live sculpture, a fresh sculpture, a real sculpture. For me, a sculpture cannot be made by a robot because it has to be done by hand. It is something which has to be done together by the artisan and the artist. There has to be this symbiosis, the artist who puts in the art and inspiration, and the marble artisan who produces with his hands the work which the artist has entrusted him to make.
While the creators of BOT-1 say that the robot still requires monitoring and further software development, creating more jobs in the process, traditional sculptors are wary. There are concerns. They have questions, and so do we. What would Michelangelo say? Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Grass is becoming a rare luxury in Chile's capital, Santiago. Why? Because a decade-long drought has caused the city to roll out emergency measures to try and restrict the use of water. More details in our next report.
Grass has become an uncommon luxury in Santiago. Landscapers and officials in the city are replacing grass and green vegetation with desert plants. Chile is having to adapt to a drier climate as it is now in its 13th year of drought, and all this is attributed to climate change.
2021 was one of the driest years in Chile's history. Providencia has 730,000 square meters of green spaces, most of them with grass. The grass is one of the most water-consuming species, consuming around 6 liters per square meter. Most of these 730,000 square meters were composed of grass. We made a diagnosis, and many parts of these grass areas were ornamental and not functional.
Chile is for the most part mountainous, the Andes range dominating the landscape. While most of northern Chile is desert, the central part of the country, which is most populated, is temperate and responsible for major food production. Earlier this month, Chile announced a plan to ration water in Santiago. This has never happened before in the city's 500-year history. The plan features a 4-tier alert system, including water pressure restrictions going up to rotating water cuts. The alert system is based on the water capacity of two rivers, Maipo and Mapocho, which supply Santiago with most of its water. These rivers have been majorly affected by the drought.
I think the most unfortunate thing is that rationing will not affect us all in the same way. Some people have guaranteed access to water, while the rest of us will have to suffer from water rationing and take the necessary measures at home to cope with it.
In some areas, the local government plans to change areas alongside roads and highways from green spaces into sustainable gardens. This will be done by using drip irrigation and growing plants that need little water to survive. In Santiago's Metropolitan Park, canals that carry water from the Maipo and Mapocho rivers to the park are 80% lower than normal. Wealthy areas have more green meadows and leafy tree-lined avenues compared to less affluent neighborhoods. But everyone is making lifestyle changes.
La sequía nos pega a todos transversalmente.
The drought hits us all. We all have to jump on the sustainability bandwagon today. Sustainability is not only about our daily habits, but also about changing certain paradigms.
Santiago's residents have been divided about the changes. While some are not in favor of the new landscaping, others have said it could be beautiful. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And finally today, a ring-tailed lemur has given birth at a zoo in Austria's capital, Vienna. Well, these mammals are native to Madagascar and feature on the critically endangered list. The lemurs are threatened and there is fears about their futures. We're going to leave you with these vigils. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
Seit 10. April haben wir wieder Nachwuchs bei unseren Katas. Am Anfang ist das Jungtier hauptsächlich am Bauch der Mutter zu sehen. Nach 2 bis 3 Wochen wandert es allerdings immer mehr am Rücken und wird dann hauptsächlich am Rücken rumgetragen. Bei der Aufzucht kümmert sich hauptsächlich die Mutter um das Jungtier. Allerdings kann es auch sein, dass die weiblichen Gruppenmitglieder sich auch immer wieder um das Tier kümmern, es putzen oder auch abschlecken. Der Vater ist eigentlich bei der Aufzucht gar nicht involviert. Katas gehören zu den stark gefährdeten Tieren, vor allem durch die Zerstörung ihres Lebensraums durch Waldrodungen in Madagaskar, wo sie auch heimisch sind. Natürlich freut es uns dadurch umso mehr, dass wir mit unserem Nachwuchs zum Erhalt dieser stark gefährdeten Tierart beitragen können.